Hello, book club friends, and welcome back to Bad Book Club with me, your host, Jade, also your favorite bookworm, hopefully. If you're hearing the tinkle tinkle of strange sounds, it is because I'm drinking a fun drink this evening. I am drinking a Dr. Pepper with amaretto, which is very sweet, and therefore I like it. So there we go. Just to start with a little housekeeping friends. I recently started posting live videos on YouTube. So live, quote unquote, because I'm not showing them live, but they're live as in they are live videos of me recording. So there's no editing. It's just, like me recording. So you're going to see bloopers and silly moments, or you might not see any of that. Maybe I nail it. But those live videos are on YouTube for viewing. Bad Book Club also has a TikTok and an Instagram and all that jazz at Bad Book Club Pod. And lastly, if you've been liking the podcast, if you like hearing about books, if you like learning about books without actually having to read them, could you please review and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app? Because it's just so helpful. It helps me reach more people, and I love to hear you guys' feedback. It's amazing. So, housekeeping done, we can start on the actual episode of this week that I'm super excited about. I'm super excited about it. Do you guys know what it is? Clearly you don't, but I know what it is. So this week's episode is The Princess Bride. I am so excited about this one. I chose it because it's a fantasy novel, so it works for adventure. But I also chose it because I've never actually read the book before, I don't think. Sometimes I have the issue that I've actually read a lot of books. So sometimes I've read books and I don't remember if I've read them or not. But in this case, I don't think I've read it. As I finished the book, I was like, no, I don't think I've read that before. I thought maybe I had, but I didn't. So it was really fun to read for the first time, I think. And I grew up watching The Princess Bride, the movie, which is really good and actually is very close to the book. So if you are interested in The Princess Bride and you don't know where to start, you can start here with this podcast, and then after we talk about it, you can watch The Princess Bride or you can read the book. Both are great. And I think that as we talk more about it, you'll see why I'm so excited about it, because I thought it was so fun to read. So let's just begin, shall we? I'll just tell you a little bit about The Princess Bride. So it was published in 1970 something, 73, and the movie was done in 84. So I'm going to talk about the movie because I think you can't really talk about The Princess Bride without referencing the movie, because the movie's almost more famous than the book at this point. And the book so closely follows the movie but changes certain aspects. So I'm going to tell you about both just in case, and then you can compare and contrast. So I'm going to talk about both equally, also because it's just really connected in my brain, because that's the way it works. Anyway, back to the story. So The Princess Bride is written really interestingly. So it is a little hard to explain. It is this book, and the author pretends that this book is an abridgment. So if you don't know what an abridgment is, it's usually if someone took this really long book and summarized it for you, but wrote like it was still the book. So it's if you took out the boring bits, he pretends it's an abridgment. The narrator, who is the same name as the author, William Goldstein, he's pretending like this is a book his father used to read to him, and that when he got older, he realized his father had removed the boring parts of the book, and so he went through and removed the boring parts of this book called The Princess Bride by Morgenstern, except that Morgenstern doesn't exist, The Princess Bride did not exist, he is making all this up. The narrator, even though he has the same name as the author, is not the author, because several things about the narrator's life are different from the author's life. So it's really interesting to read because he's pretending like this book already exists. Several times he pops in to say, hey, Morgenstern goes on to talk a ton about XYZ here, but I'm going to skip that. And it was really interesting to read because it's so cool you get to see the author's choices like that. And I also think it was so interesting what he chose to include. It shows a lot, I think. And it makes it feel very down to earth and real because it's very casual since it's interrupted. And it's a really fun read. And I also think it's a fast read. It did not take me long to read at all. So if you want a fun book, this one's the answer in my opinion. So if you understand the basics of how this book works, we can dive into the story. So we start with William Goldstein talking about how he never really liked books, and he never really was a bookish person, and his teachers tried to get him into the books, but it never worked. He was not a good student until he got sick once with pneumonia. So he had to take, I think, 2 weeks off from school, and his father, who was a foreigner, was going to read him the story before bed to distract him, make him feel better. And he was like, I guess. And then his life changed because he got hooked on the story. William Goldstein, narrator, claims that this in turn turned him into a writer, and that this is his favorite book of all time, but he's never read the whole thing because his dad used to read him the good parts of Morgenstern's novel. Now, we readers know that's not true, but it's fun to pretend it's true. So, the story begins with Buttercup, one of the world's 20 most beautiful women. Why 20? I don't know. And she lives on this farm with her parents, her horse, and Wesley, their farm boy. She's very tomboyish and she's kind of standoffish. She just likes to ride her horse. She doesn't want to brush her hair. She doesn't care. She just wants to have a good time, just wants to be left alone. She bosses the farm boy around a lot. And already in this novel, I'm noticing how the characters are really adorable. I really loved the characterization in this novel. It's maybe one of the best novels I've ever read in terms of characterization. So I define characterization as when a character feels really real to me and it feels like they're there and I feel like I have a full image of what they look like, even if I only meet them for a couple minutes. They have a whole life story, they have a backstory, they're not just there for the main character, they're their own main characters. So it's interesting. I feel like it was done really well. So I really liked the characterization. I thought it was done so well, especially Buttercup at the beginning, and even her parents. He talks about how they used to argue all the time, and that like when they argued, everyone used to think they hated each other. But then he follows it up by saying that the father died years later, and when he did die, 2 years further on, his wife went right after him. And most of the people who knew her well agreed it was the sudden lack of opposition that undid her, which I thought was the cutest little line. And it's right there at the beginning with parents that we don't know that well, but that shows you everything about their relationship. It's he's the king, I think, of short sentences that have a lot of emotion while being simply stated. And that's kind of this whole book. So anyway, she lives on this farm with this tomboy. She orders him around. Oh, and one afternoon, for some reason, they live in Florinese. I forget, honestly, the name of the town that they're in. I don't know, Florin something? I don't know. The Florinese royals arrive, and they just appear on their farm for some reason. And there's this beautiful countess who gets out of her carriage, and she's gorgeous. She's known through the land as the most beautiful thing that's ever existed. And the countess takes a liking to this farm boy, Wesley. And she asks Wesley to show her around, and she follows Wesley around. And Buttercup follows the countess, who's following Wesley. And it makes for a pretty funny scene, and I think it shows the satirical, ironic, silly vibe of the book. It says, strange things are happening, Buttercup's parents said, and off they went too, bringing up the rear of the trip, watching the count, who was watching their daughter, who was watching the countess, who was watching Wesley. So you can see there the silliness of it, and it's kind of fun to watch those chain of events happen. Anyway, during this trip around, while she's watching the countess into Wesley, she starts to get like a little protective and jealous, and she's like, ugh, why is she watching Wesley when I'm right here, and like, who does she think she is? And later that night, she goes to her room and she starts thinking about how Wesley's not even that much to look at except for his stormy eyes. He's not even that, like blank because of blank. She's just like obviously trying to talk herself out of Wesley. And through this little paragraph, she realizes that she is in love with Wesley. She says, the farm boy had eyes like the sea before a storm. And she sits up in bed and she grits her teeth. She's like, what could it be? I'm just, I'm in love with Wesley. So she decides, I have to go tell him how I feel. So she goes to the farm boy. Also, by the way, here and there, in between all this stuff, the narrator will chime in with thoughts, but not even that. There's also a lot of parenthesis in the story. So, for example, he's talking about cactuses, and he jumps in parentheses to say that jealousy used to only be told about plants, which is like, I don't even know. All of these are probably not true, but it's really fun to read. So I didn't look that deeply into the jealousy about plants fact, if you want to look into it. But anyway, so the parentheses are interesting. This book has a lot of interruptions. There's parentheses, there's like little interruptions with actual italics where the narrator puts in his own thoughts. It's very interestingly done. But she goes to the farm boy and she decides that she has to, because I don't know how sorry, I'm trying to find the chapter. Anyway, she goes and she tells the farm boy that she loves him, and she has this whole speech. She's like, I'm into you, and I know all I've done is be mean to you, but clearly I'm into you. This is terrible. Hold on. I need the actual paragraph. Where did the paragraph go? You get these beautiful bloopers when you watch me do all of this. Okay, here we go. Okay, I've found the paragraph where she tells him she loves him. It's very long, but she goes, I love you. I know this must come as something of a surprise, since all I've ever done is scorn you and degrade you and taunt you. But I have loved you for several hours now, and every second more. I thought an hour ago that I loved you more than any woman has ever loved a man. But half an hour after that, I knew that what I felt before was nothing compared to what I felt then. But 10 minutes after that, I understood that my previous love was a puddle compared to high seas before storm. And she goes on like that for several minutes. It's very dramatic. And in the face of this, Wesley just closes his door. Oh, also, if you've seen the movie, you know I would have forgotten to mention this. She bullied this farm boy this whole time, like her whole life. She'd be like, farm boy, get me my horse. And he'd say, as you wish. And that was the only thing he ever said to her. He never talked back. He never said anything. He just said, as you wish. But this time she goes to profess his love. He just closes the door. She's completely heartbroken. She thinks that he no longer likes her, doesn't like her at all. And she tries to tell herself that Wesley is dumb and that's why he doesn't love her, but that's not it at all. He knocks on her door and she's like, who is it? And he says, Wesley. And she goes, what, who? It's because she calls him farm boy, which I thought was kind of rude. And she was like, oh, the guy I just said I'm in love with. Yes, it's you. And she opens the door and it's revealed that he does love her too. Obviously, he's like, clearly I love you, but I had to pack because I'm leaving to go to America to make money so that we can marry each other. That is my plan. And they kiss, and it's one of the most amazing kisses and the first 5 best kisses known to man. And so it's all amazing and coming up. Buttercup and Wesley. First of all, the name Buttercup. What an interesting choice. So yeah, since I'm thinking of that, let's stop for a second so I can tell you my thoughts. The book is really cute. I honestly think it starts a bit slow because it starts with that whole story about how he hated school. I wish it didn't start with such a long intro about that because in all honesty, when I finished the book, I forgot that was there. So what I remember is him getting sick, and what I remember is him becoming a writer. I don't remember the first couple pages where he just drones on and on about how terrible he was at school. I don't really care or remember any of that. But then we jump into the story, and the story is pretty good. I would say that after reading this book, and right from the beginning, I am not the biggest Buttercup fan. I'm just not. I don't think she's that interesting. I think she's fun to read because she's a somewhat arrogant character, and arrogant characters cause a lot of mayhem. So it's fun to read her story because she's arrogant and therefore stuff happens when she's not meaning for it to happen, and she's kind of gullible and stuff like that. So she makes for a really great character and plot centered moment because she's so bumbling. But I also think she's rather arrogant. So I think we get that right from the beginning, where she doesn't listen to her parents, she rides her horse, she calls the farm boy, and then suddenly, as soon as anyone else encroaches on something she deems as hers, she decides that she has to have this man. To be fair, the man is more than happy about it, but also how hard, this is like the Romeo and Juliet issue where I'm like, how hard can you actually love someone if you just realize you love them? It makes more sense here, strangely, because at least she grew up with Wesley doing her bidding. So she knows him, she thinks of him as hers. So it makes more sense, but it still feels more territorial than love-like to me. Anywho, so he says, I'm going to America so I can seek my fortune and do this for you. And so she's like, amazing, wonderful. And she starts to take care of herself because she's like, I want to be beautiful for Wesley. So she starts washing her hair and regularly bathing because I guess she wasn't doing that before. And like after some time kind of goes on, she gets this news that he's died. They say that his ship was set upon by the Dread Pirate Roberts. Sorry, that's kind of hard to say. Dread Pirate Roberts. And that everyone was on board was killed. And the way she reacts to this is her parents tell her, and she goes into her room for a full day and night, and she emerges and she decides, like, I am just not gonna love anymore. It's impossible. I've loved one man and I will never love again. My heart is broken. I died today. And that's kind of where she's at. So all emotion and thought and feeling has died inside Buttercup because Wesley has died. We switch from Buttercup to information about someone called Prince Humperdinck. You can tell from his name that we're not really supposed to like him. But I really don't like him because he is super gross. He's so gross. Okay, this book, the biggest difference for me between the book and the movie, and now remember I haven't seen the movie for a couple of years, but the biggest difference was this emphasis on something called the Zoo of Death. They mention it, I believe, as the Pit of Despair in the movie, but that's not quite what it is in the book. In the book it's called the Zoo of Death. Prince Humperdinck is a prince. He is supposedly the best hunter in the world. He loves to hunt things. So he has what is called the Zoo of Death. And it's 5 levels. And each level is full of animals for him to hunt. And as each level gets lower into the ground, so like level 5, is the most dangerous. So each level gets more dangerous with the animals that he houses there. But he keeps level 5 empty because he hasn't met the most dangerous thing yet, because he's the world's most skilled hunter. And it's not great either because we get really kind of vivid descriptions of this Zoo of Death, and it's really sad, and I was like, no. And so like we also learn that Prince Humperdinck, his father is kind of failing. So Prince Humperdinck needs to find a princess, and soon, and he needs to have an heir. But the prince doesn't really care. Clearly he's not someone who cares about love or women. He just cares about the hunt. He cares about killing. It's really upsetting. So the reason we learn this is because his good friend Count Rugen, who is a 6-fingered man, tries to give him some news. And while he's giving him news, Prince Humperdinck is literally wrestling with an orangutan and has been wrestling with this orangutan for like 3 hours. And as he's speaking to him, he kills the orangutan by like grappling with it. So there's this really like graphic passage. I don't know why it comes across so graphic, but there's a couple of sentences written like this in the book. And it spells out crack in all caps in like it's separated by lines. So it's like a diagonal across the screen. My screen, because I'm reading an ebook. Crack. It's really like violent to read it because it's so in your face, and like it was really sad to read. I was like, no, he just killed an orangutan. That's how we're introduced to Prince Humperdinck, is he's killing an orangutan. So clearly we're not supposed to like him. And he's like, okay, I guess I have to find a wife now. And the Count says, I think I have someone in mind, but a little later. So right after that, his mom and dad, who don't really make an appearance in the movie, really, they're like, we'll set you up with the Princess of Gilder, because Gilder and Florin have had like some issues. And so why don't you guys marry each other? It's a treaty. So perfect. So there's this whole thing about how the princess will come and visit them and see if they're a good fit. I forget her name. I think it's like Noreen. So there's an interruption, and the narrator's like, hey, I interrupted here to take out a bunch of paragraphs about how the mom and the princess packed for this trip. And I thought that was a really interesting thing, because every time he does something like that, there's not actually any book to cut out. So that means he had to think of something that could happen there, think of why he would want to get rid of it, and then make up a reason for why the author put it in there in the first place. So it's so complicated. I don't know how he did this. So he's like, yeah, so it's this whole thing about them packing. And he's like, yeah, it's like 20 pages of them packing. And I'm like, well, good thing he took that out. And then I'm like, well, it wasn't even there. Why even bring it up? And I think it's supposed to show us it's supposed to imply that this book was like droll and like not that interesting until this abridgment got here. And so it's supposed to be like, here's the highlight reel of this book. So he has to include boring bits so he can keep up the appearance that this is an abridgment, because I can't think of a reason why packing would be important to not include or to mention not including. So maybe something like that. Just some sort of, this is an abridgment, here's an example of why I'm abridging this novel. There's 20 pages of packing, you don't want to read that. So that's what I'm thinking that is. Anyway, the princess, I believe her name is Noreen. I'm honestly forgetting her name. I don't know, something like that. She comes and they do this like feast, and there's this really cute passage where they are at a big feast in the dining hall of their castle, and I forget the exact time, but at 10:50 they were all set to be married, and at 10:51 war had almost broken out. And the reasoning was that Gilder and Florin had been at odds. I really wish that I could be sure that this place that we're in is called Florin. I don't understand why I'm forgetting. Florinese is just, it's all it is. If it's Florinese, it's Florin, right? Why am I blanking on this? Hold on. I'm feeling a little loopy today while I'm recording. I've had a bit of a long day today. Florin, yes, I'm right. Doubting myself. Okay. It's definitely Florin. I was just doubting myself. Okay, so yeah, so they're at dinner, and at the same time, a bunch of doors open. He explains this in this big long passage about how a bunch of doors open, and then the princess's hat flies off her head, and it's revealed that she's bald, but her hats have been hiding it this whole time. So she's bald, and the prince is like, get her out of my sight, leave the castle right now. I guess that's a reason to like break out into war. It's not, but I do think it shows you Prince Humperdinck's wishes, which is that I think he wants to get into war with people. So anyway, what happens next, Jade? Well, I'll tell you. Anyway, after all that jazz, the count is like, oh, there's this woman in, Florin who's supposed to be really beautiful. Why don't we go look at her? And so Prince Humperdinck rides with his count, and they arrive at Buttercup's house. I just revealed it. Buttercup's house. And he's like, hey, he sees her and he's like, wow, she's beautiful. How about you marry me? And she's like, I don't want to marry you. And he's like, you have to or I'll kill you. And she goes, kill me then, which I thought was a really fun answer. I like it when females are like bossy and arrogant and like not really caring, which is Buttercup. I feel like Buttercup takes it too far, and I feel like she takes it too far because she's dumb though, so it's frustrating. But I do like it that she's so obstinate at times, because it's fun to read like an obstinate female character. But she was like, kill me then. And he was like, I would rather not, but I will, so why don't you marry me? And she was like, I have told myself I would never love another man. And Prince Humperdinck says, that's fine, I don't want to love you. You don't want to love me, I just need an heir. And she's like, all right, cool, as long as we're agreed that I'm never going to love you. And the prince was like, yeah, that sounds good. And so they decide to get married. Next, we get an abridgment from the narrator, quote unquote, that says the next couple chapters are 3 years of the princess Buttercup receiving royalty lessons and preparing for the wedding. Now, that's not in the movie, because in the movie, I think it's pretty quick. Or it seems quick from what I remember. But in the book, apparently it takes her 3 years. He skips past all of that. And he skips past it in a way that doesn't annoy me, because he frames it as he's doing you a favor by skipping past all of it. And I'm like, oh, cool. So 3 years later, I guess, she is, excuse me. 3 years later, she is going to marry Prince Humperdinck. And so anyway, we learn she's going to marry Prince Humperdinck. We get this scene where she is introduced to the people of Florin. He's like, here is my bride-to-be. And she introduces herself. She's like, I'm Princess Buttercup. She stands there. Everyone cheers. And she's like, can I walk among the people? He's like, yes. So she goes down there and she walks among the people. They all love her. She's beautiful. She's gorgeous. She's walking. She's saying hello. She's letting them touch her dress. They all love her. Now, unfortunately, what we have next is that she's kidnapped. She goes on a ride on her horse. She just calls it horse every single day because that's her favorite thing to do. And on that ride, she sees 3 men, 1 skinny man, 1 hunchback, and 1 huge man. And they're like, hey, we're traveling circus performers. We were told there's a village nearby. Is there? And she went, no, you are incorrect. There's no village nearby. And then the hunchback says, well, then no one can hear you scream. And they knock her out and they kidnap her. So they knock her out and they kidnap her. She wakes up and she's on a boat. She's on a boat and it's rocking and she's just laying there listening to their plans. And they're talking about how they're going to kill her when they get to Gilder, like on the coast of Gilder. So it's just not a good thing. And the hunchback seems to know a ton as well. So he's like, they're talking and then after a while he's like, it's fine. She's been awake this whole time. And she's like, how did he know I was awake? And he's like, I know everything. And she was like, wow, kind of arrogant. He was like, yes, very arrogant. But she's literally thinking that. So I think also the difference between movie and book is the book is much more loose on its terms of humanity. So the movie is as if people were in an alternate world. Here, all the people tend to have strange abilities. They don't really abide by laws of physics or human nature as we know it. It's very similar. It's slightly adjusted. So this guy seems to either be smart enough that he knows what she's thinking or has a tendency to actually know what people are thinking. So you'll see soon. Anyway, they're in this boat and she falls asleep again. He knocks her out again. And then she wakes up and before she can think anything, before the Sicilian, also the hunchback, can notice that she's doing something, she jumps overboard into the water. And she's like, oh, good, I did it. I'm swimming away. And the Sicilian, the hunchback, I'm just going to call him the Sicilian because I don't like the word hunchback because I think it's a gross word to say, but he is also Sicilian. So he yells out because they can't see her. It's dark. He yells out that there are sharks in the water. So he can leave her to the sharks or she can come back to the boat and they'll kill her painlessly on the coast of Gilder. But the sharks will not kill her painlessly. And she's like, I don't believe him. He's bluffing. So she keeps swimming. And he says, Princess, the sharks can smell blood. I will cut my arm, bleed into a cup, and then toss the blood into the water, and then you'll die. And she's like, he's bluffing. And then he starts cutting himself, and she still is like, no, I still think he's bluffing. And he throws the blood into the water, I believe, and she still hasn't moved, she hasn't screamed, she hasn't done anything, but when the moon comes out, they see her in the water, and the giant picks her up out of the water, and he's like, oh, there she is, we got her. And the Sicilian is like, she didn't scream, but she would have. The Sicilian is very into besting everyone else in whatever term he thinks. So I would never assume that making someone scream, or I guess his goal was to terrorize her. So I guess he's thinking that unless she screams, he didn't succeed in terrorizing her, and she didn't scream. So he's like kind of mad about it, which is a little weird. But anyway, he's not the best guy, clearly. And the giant, he's mean to the giant, he's mean to the Spaniard who's driving the ship. And so it's just not very nice. Anyway, they're on the boat now. She's been rescued from the sharks. Oh, and it's really adorable. Halfway through the scene, right before he takes her out of the water, and she's sitting there and she's imagining tails in the water and sharks in the water, the narrator interrupts and says she doesn't get eaten by the sharks yet, pretending that this is the narrator's father. Whenever he's sick in bed, he says, she doesn't get eaten by the sharks now. And he goes, I knew that. And then the narrator's fake father says, well, it looks like you were really stressed out, and I thought I should tell you that she doesn't get eaten by the sharks yet. And I have seen this movie many times, and I completely forgot that scene happens. And I was reading this book, and I was definitely way too involved. I was like, oh my God, this is terrifying. And then the abridgment is like, she doesn't get eaten by the sharks. And I was like, oh my God, instant relief. I clearly know that's not going to happen, but I was really into it. And so the abridgment, I thought, was very cute to put that in there. Anyway, in chapter 5, this is chapter 5, by the way, that we're on. Chapter 5 is like this never-ending chapter. It takes up like most of the book. The chapters are really funny. A couple of them are really short, and 5 is like the whole book. It's huge. Anyway, they're going toward the coasts of Gilder. Now they get to this thing called the Cliffs of Insanity, and they want to go above, like climb up the Cliffs of Insanity and through the land instead of sailing all the way around, because it'll take more time to sail all the way around. And they want her to be dead on the coast. But they look behind them and they see this boat with black sails and like a black boat with black sails behind them. And the Sicilian says the famous Princess Bride line, which is "Inconceivable that anyone could be following us because no one knows that we're here and no one knows that we're doing this." And the Spaniard's like, "Well, then I guess some fisherman just happens to be going the same direction and happens to be gaining on us." And the Sicilian is like, "It's gaining on us? Inconceivable. I got the fastest ship in Florin." And the Spaniard is like, "You're probably right then, whatever." And they reach the Cliffs of Insanity with this black boat kind of chasing them, but pretending it's not chasing them. And Buttercup is terrified by that black boat. She's like, "I don't know what that black boat is, but I do not want that." And they get to the Cliffs of Insanity. It's like I think that says it's like 800 feet tall, 1,000 feet tall, something like that. And they grab this rope, and the giant, whose name is Fezzik, they all climb onto him. So they put the princess on his shoulders, the Spaniard ties himself to his waist, and the Sicilian like wraps his arms around the back of the giant's neck, and the giant begins to pull on the rope and climb up these Cliffs of Insanity. He talks about how Fezzik has never once doubted his strength. His arms can go on forever and ever and ages. He'll never tire himself out. So he's completely confident as he's climbing up this rope. Well, they're halfway up the rope, and the man from the black boat behind them has made it to shore and is climbing up the rope behind them. And so the Sicilian is freaking out. He's like, "This is inconceivable. Like, go faster, Fezzik, faster." And Fezzik's like, "I'm trying. It's hard. I have 3 people on my back." And the Sicilian's like, "I don't care. Faster." And so Fezzik's like, "I'm going to go as fast as I can." He goes as fast as he can. Now I'm going to pause for a second and talk about writing. So characterization, I think, is the biggest difference between the movie and the book. I think the movie tries its best, and it's very close, but I think the book is just so good at characterization, you can't quite match it to the movie. And it's good at characterization by a couple of ways. First of all, we're going to get backstory for every single one of these characters, except for a couple of named few. So we'll get to that then. But I also think that we like the Spaniard and whose name is Inigo, and we like the giant whose name is Fezzik, because the Sicilian kind of berates them the entire time they're doing this, and they're kind of funny while they do it. And like on the boat, the Sicilian hits the Princess Bride, like Princess Buttercup, and Fezzik says, "Please don't do that." And his reasoning is because force is my thing. But it's easy for the reader to see a character say, "Please don't hit a girl," and categorize them as not a bad guy. So even though these guys are currently kidnapping our princess hasn't actually been that warm of a character yet. And secondly, these characters are very likable. So we're okay with them, especially since the Sicilian is so mean to them. We kind of want better for them already. This is like if you listen to the Life of Pi episode, there's this moment in the boat where the author kind of emotionally manipulates you into wanting the tiger to get on the boat because Pi is pushing the tiger away, and you don't want the tiger to drown. So you're like, "No, don't let the tiger on the boat." And so it makes it much more believable that the tiger gets on the boat. Well, this is the same sort of thing where as we're watching this guy who we feel is a bad guy berate these 2 other bad guys, we feel like the 2 other ones maybe aren't so bad. So it makes more sense later when they switch sides and they kind of join onto the protagonist team. So anyway, back to the story. He's climbing up after them. The man in black is climbing up the rope after them. They make it to the top, and the Sicilian is like, "Quick, cut the rope." First of all, how did the rope get up to the Cliffs of Insanity? I don't know. I think it was a magic rope. I think he threw it. I'm trying to remember, but I think that's how it happened. Something along those lines. Like I said, it's a bit fairy tale. Think fairy tale. Things aren't always fully explained. Anyway, they cut the rope. Oh, I'm sorry. A little sleepy today. They cut the rope, and they look over the edge, and the man in black has dropped the rope in time and is now clinging to the edge of the cliffs. The Sicilian is super angry. He's like, "We have to go. We have to get the princess to Gilder, the coast of Gilder. So you guys, like Inigo, the swordsman, you stay here, take care of him, kill him. We're leaving. We're going to go this way further down." And Inigo says, "All right, I'll sit here." And at this point, we get Inigo's backstory. So I thought, in my opinion, the second largest subtraction from the movie was Inigo's backstory. Everyone knows, or if you haven't seen the movie, it's okay if you don't know this, but it's very popular in culture where Inigo says, "My name is Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die." And his whole quest is in a search for a six-fingered man who killed his father. Now, the movie doesn't actually give us any backstory. It doesn't tell us who his father was. I don't even think they mention his father's name. I think they do once or twice, but it's not really as big of a deal. So we get this backstory. It's really adorable and really heartbreaking. And like I said, the backstory makes us both pity and sympathize and want Inigo to do better. So he's not quite a bad guy after we finish his backstory. So his backstory is that he grew up as a young boy in a small city and his father was a sword maker. But of course, no one knew he was a sword maker and they were really poor, but all the same, his dad was a sword maker. He had this best friend who was a really famous sword maker named, I think, Yetzi? Sorry, I'm bad with names, clearly. He was friends with this other sword maker who would come by and if he couldn't do a sword, would ask Inigo's father to do it for him because Inigo's father was a master. And he chose not to sell swords because he said, I am an artist and I don't want fools to tell me how to make swords. I want a challenge. And so he always was humble. He never told people he was a sword maker. It wasn't part of the deal. Occasionally he would make a sword for his friend if the friend guilted him. And they'd have these adorable conversations where he'd be like, please. And he'd be like, no. He'd be like, I'll give you money. And he's like, no. I'll give you power. And he's like, no. And then he cries. And then he's like, I'll kill myself if you don't do it. And then Inigo's father, whose name is Domingo, says, all right, fine, don't kill yourself. One of these days, I'm gonna let you kill yourself. And then their rich friend would give them this nice feast. It's clearly like a really warm, happy family setting. And then one day, this man with 6 fingers on his left hand comes by and he says, are you a sword maker? And Domingo, I believe his name is Domingo. Again, bad with names. I'm pretty sure it's Domingo. So Domingo says, I'm not a sword maker, I can't help you. And he's like, I'll pay you a ton of money. And he's like, I'm not a sword maker, I can't help you. And the guy's like, okay, well, I have a problem. See, I have 6 fingers. I'm a master swordsman, and every single sword that I use is a problem because I have 6 fingers. And Domingo gets excited. He's like, oh, challenge. I will make you the perfect sword. Give me 1 year to do it. And he's like, okay, let me pay you. And the guy's like, no, don't. I'm not interested. He's like, I insist that I give you a down payment. He's like, fine, give me 1 coin and then get out of here. So he gives him a coin and he sets about his work. And for 1 full year, this guy slaves away over this sword until it's absolutely perfect. And it's called the 6-fingered sword, I believe. So he slaves over it until it's perfect and beautiful and masterful. And his father kind of even wastes away a little on it because he has trouble eating and sleeping and stuff while he's working on it. He's clearly like a manic artist, or not quite manic, but I mean in that like frenzied sort of way. And so he's like, oh my gosh. And Inigo is like, come on, Dad. And Inigo's 10, and he's like, you're doing great. And he finishes the sword, and the 6-fingered man comes back, and he says, I'd like my sword now. And Domingo says, this is your sword, and presents it. And then the 6-fingered man says, this is not worth the price we agreed upon, which I think is like 500 gold or something. And Domingo's like, fine, then you don't get the sword. And and the 6-fingered man is like, no, I want the sword. I just don't think I'm going to pay what I said I would pay because it's not worth that. And Domingo's like, no, I am an artist and you're haggling for perfection. I'm not going to give it to you now. It's mine. And then before either of them can react, the 6-fingered man lunges forward and stabs Domingo in the heart and kills him. And Inigo is distraught, destroyed. He runs out after the 6-fingered man, clutching his sword, the 6-fingered sword, which is now Inigo's. And he stops him on the road and says, no, like, face me. I'm going to fight you. You killed my dad. And the 6-fingered man is like, no, get out of the way. And he's like, no, I'm not moving. So the 6-fingered man gets off his horse and he fights Inigo, who's 10. And he's pretty good for 10, but he's not great. And so he slices Inigo down the 2 sides of his face, these parallel lines down the side of his face, and they scar horribly. And then Inigo goes to live with that really expensive, famous sword maker family friend for a couple years. But then one day there's a note on his pillow that says he must go learn For several years, the sword maker didn't hear from him, and he got fatter and richer and fatter and richer. And then Inigo comes back home, I think 10 years later. And the sword maker is like, where have you been? I missed you. Like, you keep me busy. What have you been doing? And Inigo says, I have been learning how to become a amazing sword master. Every single day for 2 hours, I would squeeze rocks in my hands. I would sprint for 2 hours. I learned from every single master in the world. I want your honest opinion, because you're a sword maker, about how good of a sword master I am. So he performs for the sword maker, and the sword maker says, like, often to create a master, it takes almost 30 years. You're only 20 something, I think like 22. And you are not a master. And he looks really sad. It's really sad. He's like, I didn't expect this. I'm not gonna need a second. And the sword master continues and he says, but I'm not done. One time, me and your father saw these two sword guys, and one was a wizard. And that is the step above master, and you could beat that guy. So he's saying that Inigo's like a wizard is what they call it, which I thought was a very silly name, but he's like, you can beat that guy. And Inigo's like, amazing, I will search for this six-fingered man. And he goes on this search for several years. He can't find the six-fingered man. He never expected to not be able to find the six-fingered man. In fact, he begins to feel like he may never find him, like maybe the six-fingered man died or went hiding and he's never gonna find him. So he begins to drink and he turns into kind of a drunkard until one day this Sicilian came by and dried him out and said, you know, like, you're wasting your talents. I think you should join my little merry team and, you know, like, we'll become really famous. And they did. They became very famous as like assassins / kidnappers / ne'er-do-wells and very rich. And so therefore he's indebted to the Sicilian. And so if he says, kill the man in black, he will kill the man in black. Now, I believe after that, I'm trying to remember if it goes directly into Fezzik's moment or if he fights him then. And I think we go into the fight scene. So what happens next is Inigo is waiting for the man in black to climb up the cliffs of insanity. He's watching him. He's like, I have to kill this guy because the Sicilian says I have to. The Sicilian saved my life. I have to do what the Sicilian says. And he's watching him climb up, and he's like, how is this man climbing up these cliffs of insanity? It's literally a sheer rock face. And he says that the man is punching his hand into the wall, making a handhold, and using that to do another punch. His feet aren't touching anything. It's just his hands, which is insane. In the movie, he's just kind of free soloing it, but like that's insane to like punch into the wall. Anyway, the Inigo's impatient. He's like, are you gonna be up here anytime soon? And he's like, why don't you wait? Because I'm a little busy. I need to focus right now. And Inigo's like, well, I could toss you down the rope. And and the guy is like, well, I can't really trust you with the rope because aren't you trying to kill me? And so here I pulled up the paragraph. It says, slow going. Look, I don't mean to be rude, but I'm rather busy just now, so try not to distract me. Sorry, Inigo said. I don't suppose you could speed things up, Inigo said. If you want to speed things up so much, you could lower a rope or a tree branch or find some other helpful thing to do. I could do that, Inigo said, but I don't think you would accept my help since I'm only waiting up here so that I can kill you. That does put a damper on our relationship, the man in black said then. I'm afraid you'll just have to wait. And Inigo watches him making his slow, painstaking pace up the wall. And he says, I could give you my word as a Spaniard. No good, the man in black replied. I've known too many Spaniards. I'm going crazy up here, Inigo said. Anytime you want to change places, I'd be too happy to accept. He just hung there resting for a while. And Inigo is like, can you get up here? He's like, look, I have an extra piece of rope. I'll drop it down and I'll pull you up. And the man's like, no, I can't trust you. This is the part I was talking about. I can't trust you to pull me up on a rope because you might drop me because you want to kill me. And the man is like, well, I swear on the soul of Domingo Montoya, you will reach the top alive. And he's like, I don't know who that is, but I can't just ignore that request, so throw down the rope. And so Inigo throws down the rope, and he's a man of his word, and he lets the man in black climb up, And then he's like, you can rest for a second and then we'll duel. And the man in black is like, much obliged, thank you. It's very funny. It's very like gentleman assassins, like that trope of like very like chivalrous gentlemen, even though you're on opposing sides. Very sportsmanlike. So then there's this great big fight scene. I'm not going to talk about the whole thing because it's kind of long, but I think you'll get the point as I'm talking about it. So there's this great big fight scene between Inigo and between the man in black. Now, I thought that putting Inigo's backstory in front of this part was very smart, because as we listen to Inigo talk about all of his work he did to become an amazing swordsman, to be a wizard, quote unquote, and then we get to this point, it puts it in a better frame for what it actually means during this fight. So Inigo's like, to be fair, I'm gonna put my sword into my left hand. I really hope this man is a good fencer because I want to fight someone who's actually worthy. And the man in black stands up, puts his sword in his left hand. And so Inigo's like, yay, like he's using his strongest hand, I'm using my weakest hand, it's only fair. And they start to fence. Now, at first, the man in black isn't doing that well, but he's doing better than most. So Inigo's like, okay, great, because anytime there's like trees or boulders, the man in black seems to have trouble. But then the man in black gets out into the open and Inigo starts having trouble. And at first, Inigo's like elated because he's having trouble and he's not trying that hard. And he's watching this flurry of attacks, and he sees the man in black has this like weakness. So he's like, okay, cool, I'll do that weakness whenever I feel like it. And slowly Inigo is being backed up to the cliffs of insanity. And he's like, okay, I'll try that tactic, and I'll put in that move that's supposed to disarm him. Well, the man in black saw it coming, and it doesn't work. And he tries again, and it doesn't work. And he's utterly shocked. No one has done this with him in the longest time. And so he's towing the edge of the cliffs of insanity, and he's like, I know something you don't know. And the man in black is like, what? And he's like, I am not left-handed. And he tosses his sword into his right hand, and they duel further, and he moves away from the cliff. And now the man in black is hard-pressed to keep up. He's pressed into boulders, he's pressed into trees, and then he's the one pressed against the cliff. And irony of ironies, he says, I also know something you don't know, that you can't see below my mask, because he's wearing like this mask and hood type of thing. And he goes like, what? He's like, I'm not left-handed either, and tosses it into his right hand, and then they continue to fight. So Inigo is getting actually really worried. He's like, this man is actually better than me. And throughout all of this, eventually he is able to like disarm Inigo, and Inigo is completely like overwrought with just like whoa, what the heck. And after that section about his backstory, we really get a feel for how good this man in black must be at swords, you know, like it must be so good to be Inigo, this guy we've just followed for quote unquote 10 years through his journey. So he's like, okay, I go to my death willingly. And the man in black is like, why would I kill you? You're too good of a sword like fighter. So he just knocks him out, ties him to a tree, and moves on. And that's when we get Fezzik's backstory. Fun facts, we are still in chapter 5. This is all chapter 5. When we move out of chapter 5, I'll tell you. Fezzik is a giant, and he's walking along with the Sicilian, and he sees the man in black coming down the path, and he's like, oh no, Inigo failed, Inigo's dead. And Sicilian is like, inconceivable. And he's like, well then, Inigo must have put on all of his clothes and gained weight. And he's very serious. And the Sicilian is like, that's not possible. Stop being stupid. And the giant is like, sorry. And he says, I'm taking the girl. You stay here and kill him, right? Like, get rid of the man in black. And Fezzik is like, what? What do I do? He's like, stand there behind that rock and toss a rock at his head and kill him. Sorry. So toss a rock at his head and kill him. And Fezzik is like, that seems kind of unsportsmanlike. And the Sicilian is like, I don't care, just get rid of the man in black. And then he runs away with Buttercup, who's, you know, bound and gagged and blindfolded and all that jazz. And so Fezzik's like, okay, I'll wait behind a rock. And during this, we get Fezzik's backstory. It says that he is like a Turk, and he was born at 15 pounds, and he like doubled his weight like as soon as he could, and then he tripled his weight, and then by 6 years old he was like the size of a full-grown man. He was huge. But for all of that, he was bullied at school because he didn't want to fight people, and the kids learned that even though he was huge, you could say whatever you wanted to him and he wouldn't do anything to you. He would just cry because he didn't want to hurt people. And so the bullying became so much of a problem that Fezzik's parents said, hey, we're going to teach you how to fight. And Fezzik is like, I don't want to fight though. And they're like, no, you have to stand up for yourself because then they won't bully you anymore. And Fezzik is like, I don't really want to. And the dad is like, it's okay, Fezzik, just punch me, I'll show you how it works. He tries to make a fist, it's not a good fist. They have to correct him on how to make a fist. It seems like he's just not good at this. His dad's like, please punch me. And Fezzik's like, I don't want to punch you, Dad. And it's really sad. It's like Lenny vibes. You know Lenny from Of Mice and Men, also a good book. It's Lenny vibes, except Lenny did not know his own strength. Fezzik does know his own strength, and it's the only thing he's proud of. And the only thing he knows he's good at. So he's slightly different character, but he has that same pitiful, cuddly bear, big guy innocence that that stereotypical giant man, but kind-hearted, like the bull Fernando or whatever his name is. Ferdinand the bull. That's the story. So just like that. So anyway, he's like, I don't want to punch you, Dad. And his dad has to really goad him into it. And he punches his dad and he breaks his dad's jaw. And it takes him a year to get back into it. But because of that, his parents decide that they want Fezzik to fight professionally. Fezzik is so upset by that choice because he does not want to fight. And at 9 years old, they start putting him into the ring to fight people from, cities around them. And Fezzik's like, I really don't want to do this. And they're like, please do it. And they're like, no, I really, really don't want to. And they're like, Fezzik, we won't threaten you because that's not very nice. But if you want us to stop and go away, we will, forever. And he's like, and I'll be alone? And they're like, yep. And he was like, okay, first of all, remember this kid, poor boy is 9, supposedly, the size of 2 full-grown men at 9. So he fights this one guy who's really famous for being an amazing fighter, and he really takes care of him in absolutely no time, and the crowd boos him because they're like, it was too easy. They're like, boo, boo, you, boo, it was unfair, I guess, because you're too huge. And his parents are like, yay, you did it though, and that's how they make their living now, is they start hauling Fezzik to different cities so he can fight people. It goes terribly. Every single place he goes hates him because he has too easy of a time just dispatching fighters, until he starts doing groups of people. He starts fighting groups and he's like, oh good, in this way people cheer because now they get to see me struggle. And on his travels, one day his parents die from some sort of plague, some sort of illness, and they're like, we've tried our best with you, Fezzik, good luck. I think his parents were kind of assholes and bred a very sad quality into him of scared of being alone because they threatened him with that. And then they left him. And so poor Fezzik was left alone in Greenland, which is the most, lonely country in the world. And he sat by himself on a rock until the Sicilian found him and said, hey, why don't you come with me? And Fezzik was like, I won't have to be alone if I go with you. And the Sicilian was like, nope. And so that's how this marvelous trio got together. And this is when the man in black rounds a corner and Fezzik throws a rock at him and it misses and hits the boulder. And he comes around the boulder that he's standing behind and the man in black is like, whoa. And he's like, I could have hit you with that, but I decided not to because it's kind of unsportsmanlike. And the man in black is like, I appreciate that. And he's like, Fezzik says, how about we fight like men? And you put your sword down, I'll put my rock down, and we'll fight it out. And the man in black is like, okay, I'll do that. Very kind of you to offer. However, I do think you have an advantage. And Fezzik is like, I'll tell you, though I tell everyone, which is that being large is not my fault. And the man in black is like, I wouldn't dare to presume it, so. Anyway, let's fight. They have this big fight. He kind of keeps trying to throw him into places and break him like a rag doll. And essentially he's fast. So Fezzik has trouble grabbing him. When he does grab him, he kind of squirms away. And the man in black jumps onto the back of Fezzik and Fezzik tries to get him off, but he kind of chokes him out and then Fezzik collapses to the ground and he's knocked out. And now the man in black is like, okay, well, I can't really tie him up, so catch you later. And he moves on. I think that backstory was also important. And Fezzik is portrayed a little differently, I think, in the movie than he is in the book. I think in the book he might actually be dumber, but he also, I think, in the book is a bit more heartwarming. So in the movie, he's a heartwarming, not very smart man. I think in the book, both of those traits are exacerbated. So he's even dumber. So he has trouble remembering instructions. Even when he's told to kill the man in black, he's like, how? How should I kill? Give me like exact instructions. Like he needs like a recipe to do everything in his life. He's not very smart. It's also something that he likes to do is rhyme. So like apparently he never really liked fighting, but he likes to rhyme words. So if someone said, hey, he would say, or if you said smell, he would say, tell. And he likes to rhyme in his head when people say things, which is like it's a very childlike quality that gives him sort of like a sympathetic view to the reader, I think. And it's not quite really in the movie, so I think they kind of made him more adult, because I think seeing that on the screen would have been irritating, honestly. No one really likes a character that characterized. Like it would feel like a caricature of a character. It would not feel like a real character, because he's very overblown in the book. So anywho, that's who he is. So that in his backstory also, by making him overly sympathetic and someone who we pity, sets him up as not that bad of a guy. And then, just like Inigo, he gives the man in black a chance to fight him, and he's bested fairly. So that we both as a reader like Fezzik and Inigo, despite the fact that they helped kidnap the princess. So because we were given backstory and all that jazz. Anyway, the man in black carries on, and he meets the Sicilian, who's sitting on a little boulder with the Princess Buttercup next to him with a knife to her throat. And the man in black is like, hello. And he tries to step forward, and the Sicilian is like, you step forward, I'll kill her. And they have this kind of back and forth, and they agree to a battle of wits, because the Sicilian claims he's a genius. They agree to a battle of wits. The Dread Pirate Roberts, which is what he is, I haven't told, you weren't supposed to know that yet, I just forgot his name. The man in black, ignore that part. The man in black sits down and says, here's my battle of wits. I have this odorless, tasteless poison. It's called iocane, and I will pour it into two goblets. I will pour it into one goblet of wine, and I will pour us two goblets, and then I'll place one in front of you and one in front of me, and you have to choose which one to drink, and whoever drinks the poison dies, and whoever doesn't lives. And the Sicilian is like, yes, an amazing battle of wits. I agree, let's do it. So he tells the Sicilian to look away. He prepares the two goblets, sets one in front of him, sets one in front of the Sicilian. The Sicilian goes into this long little monologue about how iocane is from Australia, and since he must be from Australia or something, that clearly he would put the poison in his own glass. It's this whole long drawn out thing. I'm choosing a weird detail of it to focus on. But basically, essentially, he's pointing out all of the, strategy of the moment. He's saying if you put it in front of you, that would be assuming that I would think you put it in front of you, which is just the first option, because a fool would think that you wouldn't put it in front of me, right? But he's like, but you know that I'm no fool, so maybe you put it in front of me just to psych me out, but you're from Australia. So he does this whole big long logic circle thing. And then halfway through, he points at a boulder in the background and says, what is that? And the man in black turns around, and the Sicilian switches the glasses at the last second, and then says, I will drink the one in front of me. And so they both drink the wine together, and the Sicilian is like, ha ha ha, I switched the wine behind your back, and you should never go against a Sicilian when death is on the line. And then he collapses to the side in the middle of a laugh because he just got poisoned. And Buttercup is like, what just happened? So you poisoned your own glass? And the man in black says, I poisoned both. I have a tolerance to that poison because I've been growing it steadily. So I poisoned both glasses. He would have died either way. And so they begin really hauling away, he's dragging her behind him. He's being kind of rude. I wrote down during this section that Wesley is kind of an ass, in my opinion. I don't know if I like him. So far, this book has been very enjoyable. I've liked it a lot. I think the beginning is a little slow, but I like the abridgments. I like the parentheses. I like the casual tone. It's third person. I'm not the biggest fan of Buttercup, but she's a fun character, so it's okay. And we haven't seen Wesley in a long time, but I did like Wesley, what little we saw of him. I think he's kind of a little too devoted for who she is, but it's okay. It's fine. It's adorable, so I'll take it. So I like all the characters. I think the biggest difference between the movie and the book so far is the Zoo of Death and the backstories, both of which I think add a lot to the characterization of both of relatively Prince Humperdinck and then Inigo and Fezzik. So I think it's disappointing the movie wasn't able to go into that, but I understand it's a movie, there's only so much time, what can you do? So, but during this part where Wesley's kind of dragging her around, first of all, we kind of switch away to Prince Humperdinck, but I'm gonna get there in a second. So Wesley starts dragging her along and he's kind of being a butt. Oh, you're not supposed to know it's Wesley. He has 3 names, all right? He is Wesley, he is the Man in Black, he is the Dread Pirate Roberts. You don't know he's supposed to be Wesley. We haven't learned that yet. I'm really sorry to spoil it. Anywho, he's dragging Buttercup along. He's wearing a mask. Buttercup does not know what he looks like or who he is. I think that if you're reading this, you could confidently assume that it's him. Also, I'm basing this on the fact that this movie came out in the 80s and it's incredibly famous. So if you don't know the story, I'm sorry, but it's fine. I hope I'm not ruining it for you. So he's dragging the princess along. During that, we get Prince Humperdinck's scene. They found like her horse with, like a gilder cloth on it near the coast and deduced that she had been kidnapped. So he comes with his like white horses that he calls his whites, and they're extremely fast, and then also his count and some men to take off after them because he's the best hunter in the world. So he follows the duel and he says that this is another example of humans not really being humans. He says that he can literally smell blood. So he smells that blood was spilt here. He knows he's on the right track. Clearly humans probably can't do that. If you can, maybe you're really special or you're connected to Humperdinck in some way. And he starts tracking them through the forest, talking about exactly what happened everywhere he goes. And I say here that, he's painted as inhuman, robotic. He never even trips as they walk through all the scenery. He's clearly not someone who is supposed to be relatable, soft, or kind. He's definitely our antagonist. Anyway, we're back to the part with Wesley and the princess, and he's dragging her along. And he's arguing with her, and she's like, take me back. And he's like, why, do you love him? She's like, no, I don't love him. He's like, I don't believe you. And she's like, you've never known love. And he's like, say it to my face. And they're arguing back and forth. And what I don't like about this scene is that he actually gets fairly physical with her. So he chokes her, he slaps her. I don't like that. It's not in the movie. And it's not in the movie clearly because that's not good. I don't know if maybe that just, clearly he's trying to not give away that he is Wesley right now. So he's being violent because that's the character of the Dread Pirate Roberts. But I really dislike that our hero is currently hurting our heroine and being outright mean to her. Basically, he's testing her to be like, do you love Humperdinck? Because I think if she had loved Humperdinck, then he would not reveal that he's Wesley. But he has to see whether she was affected by his death, whether, like, death, quote unquote, or if, Humperdinck and her are actually in love. Because clearly he's been away for a long time, so now he's back, he has to sort out what's going on. And he does this in the guise of the Dread Pirates Roberts, and he does this by egging her on and teasing her and telling her she's never known love, and she's like, I have too, I died the day my love died, and all this stuff. And eventually she gets really annoyed with him and just shoves him down this hill into a ravine, and he lands at the bottom, and she's about to turn and run away, except she hears, as you wish, down at the bottom. And she's like, it's Wesley. He's the only one who's ever said that to me. I'm so stupid. So she dives down the hill with him, even though he's yelling something that she can't hear now. And now they're at the bottom of this ravine. And they get to this bottom of the ravine, and there's another little italic like narrator interruption, and he says, my wife, as Morgenstein says that his wife was always upset that there wasn't a reconciliatory scene here where we got to see the princess and the Dread Pirate Wesley reunite. And then the narrator, the author Morgenstein is fake, and then the narrator comes in and says, I agree with this fake author's wife that there should have been a scene. But Morgenstein probably thought, that it would just be like not very interesting and like I've loved you and like hugs and kisses or whatever and like kind of useless, and it probably would have fell flat on the page, and that's why he didn't include it. And so I thought that was a really interesting choice. I'm not quite sure what it means. I think it's a little satirical. I think it mocks this version of the story. So this story in my head is kind of like, have you ever seen that show, Jane the Virgin? So Jane the Virgin kind of picks at telenovelas while at the same time being a telenovela, and it's because it's like kind of satirical. So here in this book, I think that we are picking away at adventure books and like romance books while also being a adventure romance book. And so it's satirical, it's supposed to be enjoyable, it's supposed to be ironic, it's supposed to be funny. So the fact that there's not a scene where they embrace is kind of interesting and weird. And it's weird especially because our narrator is telling us he wishes there was one. It's very relatable. It makes you feel really close to the book, close to the author, because you're like, oh, I agree with this author, even though he's the one doing this to you. It's really interesting. I think the whole function of this abridgment was a really cool idea. And I feel like it probably must have been difficult to convince people to get on board with it, but it worked out fabulously, clearly. So anyway, now they're in the ravine, and Humperdinck's men are getting closer, and now she wants to run away with him. And she's like, what were you saying when I was coming down? And he was like, I wasn't saying anything. She was like, no, yes, you were. And he was like, I was saying, please don't come down here. And then she came down here because now we're stuck in the ravine. And she was like, well, like, we could climb out. Why don't you carry me out? He's like, I am tired, Buttercup. And she's like, don't be rude to me. Don't be like an asshole. And he's like, how dare you, or whatever. They start to get into immediately like an argument. It's phrased in a funny way because he says, within a couple minutes, they were immediately arguing. And it's like, well, I guess, but hold on now. Have I been talking for an hour already? I have. Goodness. I have a lot to say still. I guess there just won't be much analysis? Yikes. All right, let's keep going. So I've realized now that it's been an hour and I'm only halfway through the book. Clearly I got too excited about this book and I've been telling you too many things. So I'm going to start hurrying up the summary so I can tell you some of my lasting thoughts. So they realize they're trapped, they have to go through this thing called a fire swamp. A fire swamp clearly is not real, but it's explained to us in a way like we know it's real. And we're told that it's a very terrifying place, and Buttercup and Wesley are both upset about having to go in there because there are things called ROUSs, which is rodents of unusual size, and there's also something called snow sand, which I guess is similar to quicksand except that you fall fast, and like there's nothing that you can do to stop that. So they're walking, and there's also like fire that randomly erupts. And so they're walking through the fire swamp and they start to feel comfortable, and he tells her the story of how he became the Dread Pirate Roberts, which is that his boat was set upon, but he said he wanted to live for true love, and the pirate let him live as his valet and trained him, and then eventually told him that Dread Pirate Roberts is just like this character, and it's replaced every once in a while to keep the name alive. And so he becomes Dread Pirate Roberts, and then he comes here for her. And they're going through the swamp. Only a couple of notable things happen. One of the ROUSs attacks Wesley, and the princess falls into a snow thing, and he dives in after her holding a vine, but then he can't reach her, so he has to let go of the vine and grab her and then find the vine again, but it works out all right, and they're able to come out of the swamp. And they come out of the swamp, but they're met by Humperdinck's men. And Humperdinck is like, I am here to take you back, and I'm here to kill this man, and Wesley's like, I will never go with you, she will never go with you, I will die here for love. And he's like, you will die. And he's like, I will torture you. And he's like, death first. And it's really dramatic. And then Buttercup is like, will you let him live if I go with you? And they're like, yes, of course. And she's like, okay, I'll go with you. And then of course they capture Wesley and they take him to their zoo of death, and they put him, lo and behold, in level 5. Because he is the most dangerous game, clearly. And they're separated again, and it's really sad. And chapter 6, we're finally done with chapter 5. Chapter 6 is them preparing for the wedding. In all honesty, not a ton happens here. Basically, we learn that the princess is having nightmares because it's 60 days until their wedding. There's a ton of festivities that are happening in the lead up to the wedding because it's also their 500th anniversary of the city, I guess. So And also, Wesley is chained and kept below in level 5. Also, Inigo and Fezzik just are kind of left aimless and they can't find each other after all this happened. So Inigo's drinking himself to death and Fezzik is off doing something, crying, I guess, because he's alone. Anyway, Humperdinck and Buttercup, after her nightmares, have this conversation where Buttercup says, I can't marry you. If you make me marry you, I will kill myself. So Humperdinck is like, oh, don't worry. You love your man. How about you send him a letter? And if he responds, I'll let you go. And he says that he sends her letter out with, 4 ships in every direction. And she is constantly talking about Wesley, and he's getting more irritated because he's a jealous man, and he does not like hearing about her love Wesley, the perfect man. And all this time, they're working on something called the Machine, which is some sort of torture machine, and the Count, the six-fingered man, is in charge of it because he loves pain, and he likes the study of pain and what it does to you. So, really amazing, really happy. And over time, we get the feeling Humperdinck halfway through here. So another difference is in the movie, when Humperdinck is following them through the fire swamp, he's like, I have to frame Gilder for the murder of my wife. We don't learn that till now, halfway through the book, and I honestly think it's a much better reveal. And I'm like, whoa, he was behind the kidnapping in the first place. He was mad because it got thrown off, but the people love her more, so when she dies, we can fight Gilder because he likes war. So, he also gets irritated though, because he's mad that Wesley is downstairs. He would just like to kill him, but the Count loves to torture people, so he's letting the Count torture him. And the princess is so in love with Wesley, he's getting irritated. And during one conversation, he talks about how for their wedding, he wants all these ships to do something. And she goes, except for your 4 ships. And he's like, what? And she's like, 4 ships. And he's like, oh, yes. And in that moment, she's like, he didn't send the 4 ships out. And so she approaches him and she says, I know that you didn't send the 4 ships out now. Clearly you did not, but Wesley will comfort me. He's better than you. You're a coward. Good day, sir. He freaks out, runs downstairs, and in the middle of them torturing Wesley with something called a machine, so far the machine is like this thing built of suction cups, and they've only done it once or twice to Wesley, and each time was awful for him. And each time on the scale it was set at, it has this little rotator. It goes from 1 to 20. It was only set at 2. So Humperdinck comes in, throws the switch all the way to 20, and Wesley dies. So that's very interesting. He literally dies. He dies on the table. He screams. Now, while he's screaming, we kind of flash back a little, or we kind of remember, I guess. Inigo and Fezzik are in the middle of this thing that was requested by Prince Humperdinck. He wants this place called something of thieves. Ugh, I wish I was better at names, everybody. I'm sorry. I write them down, but then I have to remember where it is. Anyway, it's called Thieves' Quarters. It's where criminals are. He wants the Thieves' Quarters cleared out. Inigo is there, and he's drunk, and they're trying to clear him out. But one of the guards ends up being Fezzik, who recognizes Inigo, and they're like, oh my god, we're together again. And Fezzik takes care of Inigo, gets him off the drink, and then tells him all about how a 6-fingered man is in the palace. And then Inigo says, oh, I'm so glad. And also, I bet the man in black is with him, and we need a brain. You're the brawn, I'm the swords guy, but we need a brain. Man in black is the brain that we need. He's clearly here. And then they hear that scream, and as they're walking through town, they hear that scream, and Inigo's like, it has to be in the man in black. Let's go find him. And so he tells Fezzik, he's like, Fezzik, I'm begging you, follow that sound. And it's the cutest little passage where Fezzik just runs through the city screaming, quiet, and tearing apart carts and stuff because he said his friend Inigo begged him to. And they walk all the way to this little hidden sort of door where this albino man is carrying a wheelbarrow. Now, this albino man has made appearances in the book so far, but he's not that important. Basically, he mends the wounds of Wesley after they're done with him, and he's pretty nice. He's like, you should just give them what they want, or the machine is bad, I can kill you, right? He's a nice guy. But Inigo and Fezzik are like, hey, and then they kill him, and then they go into this door, and it's a door to the Zoo of Death. Now, supposedly, it's a fake door, and it's not the door that, Prince Humperdinck uses. So this door is set, I guess, with booby traps and stuff like that. So they go to level 1, which has like scary creatures in it. They go to level 2, and they go to level 3, 4, and along the way they fight snakes that wraps around them. All the candles go out, doors lock behind them. What else happens? Bats fight them, and it's in the night, and Inigo and Fezzik are arguing because they're both terrified. They get down to level 5, which is brightly lit with just an unlocked door, and they're not sure what it is. They're not sure what the booby trap here is, and if they touch the door handle, there's a spider on it that will kill them if they touch it. But Fezzik senses Inigo's fear and just rushes at the door and breaks it down, and Fezzik stomps on that little spider that he sees. So they make it in there, and they see that Wesley is dead, which is not good. And so they're like, okay, well, I don't accept this. Let's find the Miracle Man and get him alive. So they take Wesley, and the giant carries him to this like little hut called where a Miracle Man is. What is a Miracle Man? It's this guy who used to work for the king, and Prince Humperdinck fired him. I guess they're like, like the little healers in this world. And he has been fired now and hasn't worked for 3 years. But he's like, okay, I'll help you, after like an argument with his wife, who's like really witchy. There's this whole chapter about how like he's not sure whether he can do it. And so he's like, I can't help you. But the wife is like, you have to help them. And he's like, okay, I can work with dead people. Like, let's see why I should help this man. He pumps some air into his lungs, and then Wesley says true love while he's dead, and that's the reason why he wants to come back. So he helps him and his wife, the Miracle Man and his wife, make this like little thing called a resurrection pill, and Wesley is supposed to swallow it, and apparently it's supposed to keep him alive for an hour. They don't know what happens after the hour, but it's supposed to keep him alive for an hour, except that after they leave, the Minuteman remembers that he may have messed something up, and it's more like 40 minutes. And the wedding is today. So Inigo needs to get in there and kill the Count. Wesley needs to get in there and stop the wedding, and Fezzik wants to help his friends. So they hatch a plan, and Humperdinck is actively trying to set kind of chaos in the works. He's trying to make his guards busy and out of the way so he can frame Gilder for killing his wife, which he plans to do after they get married. And he gets nervous because he knows that something might happen, so he moves up the wedding. So it used to be at 6, now it's at like 5:30. And at this part of the book, we get lots of like time codes of each minute what is going on. So it's really interesting. But essentially, they get to the castle, They put the resurrection pill down Wesley's throat, and he wakes up immediately, and he's like, what is going on? We're here. Why would you wake me up for my love's wedding? I clearly don't want to go to this. They have to convince him to help them, and he hatches a plan. They put on like a cloak, and he stands in a wheelbarrow, and they kind of like the giant man, Fezzik stands in a wheelbarrow, and they kind of wheel him at all of the guards outside while he's on fire, and he's screaming, I am the Dread Pirate Roberts, and there will be no survivors. And I guess it's so scary that all the guards run away, except for the one that's been entrusted with the key to the only only entrance that has a key that's not guarded. So they get the key from that guy, they go in, and while this is happening, the prince and the princess are currently getting married, and there's that famous scene with the bishop guy being like, marriage is what brings us together today, and it even has that same like lisp thing going on in it, and it's pretty funny. I really like that scene. Anyway, they bust in, and they get there, and the Count is in the hallway ready to meet them, and Inigo kills the 4 soldiers that are with the Count and says, I'm Inigo Montoya, you killed my father, prepare to die. And the Count runs away. Inigo chases after him, but the Count locks himself behind a door, and Inigo has to get Fezzik to help him knock it down. While Fezzik is helping him knock it down, he loses Wesley, because Wesley's starting to walk again. So Fezzik is all lost, he doesn't know where he's supposed to go. And Inigo chases the Count down the hallway. Now, before the Count and all that came out to meet them, the prince and the princess got married. So they got married. He said, say we're man and wife. The archbishop says, you're man and wife. And then he turns around and says, Count, go see whoever's making that racket. And he grabs, he tells his parents to take the princess to her quarters. And he runs to his quarters to grab stuff to frame Gilder so he can kill his wife ASAP before something goes wrong. And the Count's running, so we're back on now to the Count. So the timing is a little bit crazy here, clearly. Inigo's running after the Count, and we get this really infamous scene where they start fighting, and the Count has this knife and stabs Inigo in the heart. And not the heart, sorry, the gut. And so Inigo is like dying on the wall, but he stuffs his fist into the wound, stands up, and starts fighting the Count. And every time he cuts the Count's face just like his face. And every time he strikes, he says, "My name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die." And after a while of this, the Count dies from fear, and his face is like utterly terrified. And it's very ironic that the man interested in pain and fear dies from fear. And Inigo loves it. And then, bleeding, he goes to find the others. Now, while that's happening, the princess is being walked to her room with the princess parents, and they leave her at the room, and she's like, "I've been married and Wesley hasn't come, so I'm going to kill myself." So she grabs a florin dagger off the wall, the same type of dagger that the Count used to stab Inigo. And she gets ready to stab herself, and then Wesley says, "Your breasts are beautiful, you shouldn't stab yourself." And I was like, gross. I don't like that comment. I don't think this is like a really modern book. I was like, maybe don't. Goes to stab herself. He says, "Stop." She's like, "It's Wesley." And then the prince comes in and finds them. And there's this whole like mental standoff between the prince and Wesley, where Wesley's like, "Maybe I'm bluffing about how weak I am. Like, drop your sword now or else." And during this whole time, we know that the resurrection pill is actually shorter than what Wesley thinks it is. So Wesley thinks he has an hour, but it's actually 40 minutes. So like halfway through his speech, he starts having trouble. It's less of a problem in the movie. They don't really talk about that in the movie, but in the book it's very stressful. He almost like pitches over and faints, but he stands up and tricks the prince, and the prince sits down to have his like extremities tied, because Wesley did this whole speech about how he would cut off all his hands and feet and leave his ears so people could be terrified of him and he would hear it. And then he loses his strength, and Inigo gets there, and they're like, "Oh my god," and they're like, "Oh, good thing we did all this." And then down out the window, Fezzik is there with 4 horses, and he says, "I lost you guys, and I didn't know what to do, and I saw these horses, and I thought they'd be good for an escape." And Inigo is like, "You had a thought, Fezzik, a good one." And they all jump out of the window, and Fezzik catches them, and they ride their horses off into the sunset. And here the narrator stops us to remind us that, like, this story is about how life isn't fair, and Morgenstein in the book ends it with the fact that Inigo is still bleeding out, Humperdinck is following them, the princess's shoe, the horse loses a shoe, and then like Wesley's resurrection pill fades. I don't know what that means. So like they start having problems on their escape. And he says, "But I also like to picture that it worked out." Although, did it work out? Because they kind of argued a lot. It leaves a lot up to imagination, and it ends in a lot less satisfying way than the movie does, because the movie ends on just a very happy note, which is, I think, the biggest difference between the movie and the book, other than things included, is that the book really focuses on this theme that life is not fair, and that's not at all present in the movie. The movie is just happy-go-lucky. The book is supposed to be like a story about how life literally is not fair, and you can't expect it to be. People die, like Wesley, when they're not supposed to. I also think, though, that that's supposed to add intrigue to the book and make you think that it won't end well. So I think it's satirical. It tries to be something more. It tries to make a point about how life isn't fair. And at the same time, while it's making it, everything happens that's supposed to happen. It's like how I was saying before, it's poking fun at these stories while also being this story. So it pokes fun at stories that are unfair because it's not true, but it is a fair story. Even though the ending is kind of muddied, all the readers, I think they get away. Because who wouldn't after reading a book like that? And anyway, that is the summary of The Princess Bride. I know this has been a long episode, but stick around for just 10 more minutes. I'll give you my brief analysis. So I've talked entirely too long about this book because I was a little excited about it, because Princess Bride is one of those movies I watched when I was a kid and just loved. I love that movie. It's so fun, and it's such a good book, and the book so closely follows the tone of the movie in terms of its like funny, casual, silly writing style that's also somehow heartwarming, and the interruptions are usually funny. They usually add tension or relief, and they're moments of like levity. I really loved this book so much. It was a fast read. It was a fun read. I thought it was it was about love and betrayal and passion, and it was a fantasy book. This is supposed to be adventure, science fiction, and fantasy. This is a fantasy book, but as if a modern reader was reading it and making adjustments to make it fun, and then they gave it to you. So it's a little different. It's a little out of left field. Not a lot of fantasy books have interruptions about what their publishing house would think of parentheses, I think it adds a sort of realness to it, because we know this is a fake story, but we also feel like it's not fake because these abridgments, these middle bits, feel really real. It feels like this could be a real place, Florin, because we have a guy telling us it's a real place who's talking about the book. So it's really fun. I thought it was just so fun. I feel like this book is simple, effective. I think it's very satirical and ironic. I think it's a great fantasy book because it's like a fairy tale fantasy combination. And I thought it was perfect for adventure because it's an adventure book. It's about romance and sacrifice and torture and a beautiful woman. Do I wish that there had been less references to her beauty? She has one moment where she says, "Wesley, I also have a mind," and he completely negates that and only talks about her beauty. But that's part of the joke. Do they actually love each other? You decide. I'm not sure. That's part of why I like this book a lot. A lot of what we talk about on the podcast is me saying that books are not that scary, and part of the reason why people don't read some classics is because they tend to be more vague. Or not even just classics, but some books, is because they tend to be vague, and it's hard because you're like, I want an ending. I want you to give me an ending. I love ambiguity in books because I like making my own choices, and I like trying to weed out what the most possible choice was and why the author did these things. And this book is one of those things where when you read it, there's so many possibilities for why the story is happening this way and for why the author put in these abridgments, these narrations. So I just think it's a really good practice in making your own thoughts about what you're reading, about what you're consuming, like why I think he's interrupting might be different than why you think he's interrupting, or the reason that he says that life is unfair. Maybe he means it seriously, and this is a story about how life is unfair. I took it more in a satirical, ironic way because I think he pokes fun at stories like that by writing a story like that. And it's just as heartwarming as we want it to be, while also being a little bit different. So I don't know. I think it has so much ambiguity. I'm smiling because I just love the book. I thought it was so fun. So I feel like this episode was a little rambly. I apologize, but I hope you had a really fun adventure through Princess Bride with me. This book is very contemporary. Not to get more into literary methods, but it's very contemporary. Contemporary books are like 40s to now, basically. And especially in the 70s, satire was really big. So it makes sense to me that this is kind of a satirical novel. And satire is one of those things that's kind of loosely defined. But it's kind of like if you're making fun of something by doing that thing. And it's also defined as like something where you're suggesting reform. I think this book suggests reform in how we treat stories, because I think it's saying that we shouldn't read stories and expect them to be fair. We shouldn't live life and expect them to be fair. And if it is fair, it's on accident. And this story is supposed to show that. So I guess if you had to take away one thing from this book / this episode, I guess it's life isn't fair, but there's always a bright side, and you can look on the bright side if you want to. And I don't know, why not? Look at it that way. Thank you for joining me for The Princess Bride and our stumbling through the story. I had the best time talking about it. I had the best time listening to it and reading it. If you guys are interested in The Princess Bride, if you liked today's episode, subscribe, review, read it, leave me comments on Instagram, on TikTok. I would love to hear from you, my Bad Book Club nerds and friends. If you want to support Bad Book Club for less than a coffee a month, you can support us on Patreon, and you'll get extras like book and movie recommendations tailored to each episode and all that jazz. Anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for being awesome, and I'll see you in 2 weeks for a shorter episode, I promise. And I will see you then. Goodbye, lovelies!